Hello everyone, welcome to Extreme Chess Academy. In this tutorial, we'll cover each piece by piece and how they move. So let me get you started by introducing the king, which is the most powerful piece on chessboard. And yet it's known to be the most lowest piece on chessboard as well, because a king at any given time can only move one step at a time. So a king can essentially go to any direction, but it can only move one step at a time. The other condition is the square that you want to move to should be free. In other words, if it was occupied by a pawn, your own material, or your opponent's pieces, it's not considered to be free. So you cannot technically bump into another piece unless it's a move that's called capture. We'll cover about that a bit later. But for now, just keep in mind that your king needs to have free square, or any piece that needs to move. The extent of the move is decided by whether the square is available or not, which means it's empty and not preoccupied. Let's introduce the next piece, the most powerful piece on the board from the sense of mobility, as in the number of squares it can move and the various directions it can move. Queen is considered to be the most powerful piece on chessboard simply because it can move up or down or sideways, right or left, and it can also move in diagonal. So let's say if it is sitting on a white color square, it can move through entire diagonal of the light color squares. It can also move through this diagonal. Now, what makes it unique is it can technically move like a king in any direction. The only difference being it's not limited like king to move only one step. It can actually move to the end of the board if it is free to move, which means there are no other pieces on the way. And if there was a piece on the way, then it cannot move. For example, there is a pawn here and there's another pawn here. So the extent of this queen in this diagonal, if he has to move upward, is only till here. It cannot bump onto the pawn unless it's a capture, but it can certainly move to any of these squares, or it can go this way or this way. So that's about the queen. Let's get introduced to the next piece, that is the rook or the castle. Now, the good thing about the rooks is they move vertical or horizontal. So they can move up and down. It's one of the capabilities of the queen, or it can move sideways. So imagine like a holy cross. It goes like a plus shape. So you can go up or down or left or right, but it cannot move sideways. It cannot move diagonal. So this white diagonal, rook cannot move this way, or it also cannot move this way. So that makes it different from the queen, because queen can move diagonally too, but rook can only move up or down or sideways in a straight line. The next one would be the bishop. So in case of bishop, the good part is if the bishop is sitting in a light color square, in this case it's in white color square, then what it can do is it can move all along the white color square. So for example, it can go all the way until end if there's no block. It can also go travel through white color squares. It can go all the way this side. So any direction it can go as long as it is connected to white square. Now, one thing to keep in mind is in chess, we have a pair of bishop, which means one is a white colored square bishop and the other one is a dark color squared bishop. So it's pair bishop. One sits in the light color, one sits in the dark color. And both of them keep moving in their own respective color diagonals. That's the beauty of bishop. That's the only power it has got. It cannot move like rook upwards or downwards or sideways. And it can only go in a diagonal, and that too in the color it belongs. The next would be the knight. Knight is a little peculiar as compared to other pieces. It can jump as opposed to other pieces, and in a particular format, L shape. So a knight, easy way to remember is it leaps 2 steps forward, 1, 2, and then it has an ability to go to left or right. So in this case, let's say it can jump to this square or it can jump to this square. And you can directly lift the knight and keep it to that destination of your preference. So let's say if I want to move this knight, I can move it here. So it's 1, 2, and 3. Or I can jump back and I can jump in this direction. Now, this could be through any part of the board as long as it's permitted, in the sense your arriving square should be free. If it's preoccupied by your own piece, like I said before, it cannot make its jump. And that's true for any pieces, as mentioned before. In order to be able to move, your square should be free. So think of a knight, what all squares it can jump. I'm just placing a pawn on each of the squares the knight is capable to jump when it's placed centrally. So a fun fact is, if a knight is sitting in a white color square, the squares it can jump is naturally the black color squares, opposite color squares, as you can see. And there are 8 of them. So a knight well placed in center can actually leap to 8 squares. It has control over 8 squares wherever you want to meet. Again, knight jumps in L shape, so it goes 1, 2, and 3 if it wants to go straight. If it wants to leap on sideways, it can go 1, 2, and 3. And if it wants to go up, it can go 1, 2, and 3. Similarly, you can go any direction as shown. Last but not the least, again, knight also comes in pairs. So you will have 2 knights in your game. So one knight will be here and one knight will be here in the starting position. And the way you would try to navigate your knight, let's say to the other side of the board, it would go something like this. You jump in an L shape, and then you can reach on the other end of the board. And finally, I'll introduce you to pawn. Think of pawn like soldiers. And they, from a rank or an hierarchy perspective, they are the least valuable piece, but they are the ones that get the most strongest once they get promoted to the other side of the house. So for instance, the pawn has the tremendous ability to keep progressing, which means moving upward. So if white pieces were set on this side of the board and pawn was moving up, so what it can do is basically march up in this direction. And the way it works is you have a choice. When it's the first move from base position, you can actually move 2 steps, but you could choose to make 1 step. Now, let's say if you move 2 steps, then further on, you can only move 1 step at a time. So let's say in the next move, you move here, then you push 1 step forward and 1 more step, and then finally it arrives in the queen, in the square, which is called the promotion square, where it's like gaining back a second life. So you can actually claim any of these listed pieces. Starts with the queen, or a knight, or a rook, or a bishop. What it cannot claim is a king, or leave it as it is as a pawn in the last square. You definitely have to claim it, and you have to claim it immediately after the move, which means the moment you get promoted, you have to replace it with a piece that you like to bring onto the board. Now, as I said, a pawn can go 2 steps, or it can also go 1 step. Now, if you choose to go 1 step, Then thereafter, you can only go one step at a time. So from there, it can only move one step at a time until it gets promoted. What you cannot do is, let's say you played one step, and then now you choose to do two steps. You cannot. Playing or promoting pawn two steps can only happen at the start of the position, the base position. If a pawn is sitting in the second row, and then when it pushes the pawn for the first time, you can make a two move. If not, you can choose one move. But after that, you have to stick to one move per step. So that's all about the pawn.